Okay, so just to catch up a little bit and figure out where we're at and where we're headed. Last week we discussed, so the first, just to summarize quickly, we are in sort of the second song. The first song of the Song of Songs, first chapter and a half, it was clear that while both the man and the woman are interested in the relationship, they are not the level of commitment and the level of what's the word I'm looking for? The level of excitement is not the same. And it's clear that she, the woman, is very much in love. She says, she calls herself, she says, Cholat ahava ani, I am lovesick. She says, she's talking about homes, talking about furniture. She wants to move in. He is much more reluctant. He's willing to praise her from time to time, but he's not even willing to tell her where he is. And that was the first song. The second song, which we began last week, the tables turn. In the second song, beginning of middle of chapter 2, verse 8, is all of a sudden, my beloved, the man, is leaping, is skipping over the mountains, jumping over the hills, and he's coming to meet his beloved, the woman, the young woman. And we discussed last week that that is a reference to the Exodus. When God came to take the people out of Egypt, he didn't just show up and taking his time, but he actually leaped over the mountains. And leaping over the mountains, according to Rashi, means that he is skipping over, he's rushing. Why is he rushing? Because according to the covenant of the parts, between the parts, the promise to Abraham, it said, God tells Abraham that he will bring the people back after 400 years of being foreigners in a foreign land and being enslaved. So it said 400 years. In reality, we were only in Egypt for 210 years. Where did all the years go? It's because the man was anxious. He said, I'm going to come pick you up at 8 o'clock at night. But by 4 p.m, he was already anxious. So he was already knocking on her door. So that's the second song describing how the man is much more anxious, coming to get the woman, get the Jewish people out of the exile. And there are beautiful verses. And I'm just going to read some of the verses here. We read some of them last week, and he describes how it's time to go. It's the beautiful time to hang out because nature is blossoming. I'm reading chapter 2, verse 11. For behold, the winter has passed. The rain is over and gone. The blossoms have appeared in the land. The time of singing has arrived. And the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. By the way, the time of singing, it's not clear. Singing could be singing, or it could be the time that we hear the birds, because Zamir is also a name of a bird, but Zamir also means song. So there's a singing bird. I don't know what it's called in English. So here they translate the time of singing, but the bottom line is the blossoms are spreading. There's no more rain. It's springtime. The birds are singing. He continues, the fig tree has put forth its green figs, and the vines with their tiny grapes have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my beloved, my fair one, and come away, meaning come with me. And everything is wonderful because God is anxious to take the people out of Egypt. Now, when you read the song, like we mentioned, there's 3 levels of reading the song: the simple, the historic, and the spiritual, the Kabbalistic. So we'll start with the simple. The simple, what happens right here is now she is not available. Why it's not 100% clear, we'll see later, but right now she's not available. How do we know she's not available? Because in verse 14, he is talking to her and she's saying, why did you appear to me? So obviously she is concealed. And look how he says it, beautiful, very poetic. Verse 14, my dove in the clefts of the rock, in the curvature of the steps, show me your appearance, let me hear your voice, for your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely. In other words, comely. In other words, he is saying, show me your face. Obviously, she is hidden. The verse continues, 15, seems to be saying, seize for us the foxes, the little foxes who destroy the vineyards, for our vineyards are with tiny grapes. The way we're going to read this verse, the way some people read it, is she says, I can't come with you. I know it's beautiful. I know you want to come out. I know you want to go hang out, but I can't. Why? I have to protect the young grapes because foxes are coming and they could destroy the vineyard. In other words, I'm too busy. What does she say? Verse 16, she gives him a nice, beautiful compliment. My beloved is mine and I am his, who grazes among the roses. she's praising him. But verse 17 is a sad verse. What does she say? She basically says, come back later, come back later. Verse 17, until the sun spreads and the shadows flee. In other words, wait till later in the day when the sun will fill the sky and there'll be no more shadows. Go around, liken yourself, my beloved, to a gazelle or to the fawn of the hinds on distant mountains. In simple English, what she says is go take a hike. Go to distant mountains, right? She is not available to come with him. Why? We don't know. We'll see later. Now, what happens before I turn the page? Do you think he comes back? Of course not. And that's what we get to next chapter, chapter 3, which is still part of the same song. He has to go looking for her. She has to go looking for him. But that's what happens. She comes, he comes, says, look, it's so beautiful. Nature is sprouting. All the birds are singing. Let's go, let's spend time together. What does she say? She says, I'm too busy. Why don't you run, take a hike on the hills, come back later. And that's the song. And again, like we said in the first level, there's a lot here about missed opportunity. In the first song, she is anxious. He is less anxious. Now he is anxious. She's telling him come back later. So that is the simple interpretation. Now we're going to go to the historic interpretation. And the historic interpretation, at least in the beginning, differs a little bit from what I said in the simple interpretation, but at the end, it comes full circle and they align again. When you get to the historic interpretation and you read verse 14, and that's the verse we want to focus on today, verse 14. Verse 14, my dove is in the clefts of the rock, in the coverture of the steps. Show me your appearance, let me hear your voice, for your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely. Comely, I don't know how to pronounce it. What is he saying here? According to the historic perspective, the previous verses were talking about the Exodus. The winter is slavery. Springtime is the Exodus. We read it earlier. The beloved, the man coming and leaping over the hills, represents the idea that God is coming to take the people out of Egypt. What happens then? So according to the historic perspective, 14, when my dove, the bird, my beloved, is stuck amongst the rocks, that's a metaphor for the Jewish people right before when they were being chased at the Red Sea and they were trapped at the Red Sea. There's a Medrash, Rashi is going to quote the Medrash, that were trapped from both sides. On one hand, the dove is fleeing from the hawk, so it's trying to hide between the rocks. On the other hand, between the rocks, there's a snake, and therefore it's stuck. And that's the story. That's the story of the Jewish people at the Red Sea. On one hand, they have the sea in front of them; they can't move forward. They also have the Egyptians chasing them, so they're stuck amongst the clefts of the rock. Why are they stuck? What's the purpose of it? So Rashi is going to say, let's continue reading the verse. Show me your appearance. Let me hear your voice. It's God turning to the people and says, I want to see where you turn to in the time of sorrow. And that's exactly what the Jewish people do. They call out to God. So in other words, God, according to this interpretation, it's almost like God orchestrates this trapping of the Jews amongst the clefts of the rock between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea in order to hear, because God loves to hear the prayers of the Jewish people. So he says, please pray to me because your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely. That's according to the interpretation, the second interpretation. So the historic interpretation says this is still part of the redemption, but the bottom line is at the end, when the verse 17, when she says, go take a hike until the sun spreads and the shadows flee, go around, liken yourself, my beloved, to a gazelle, to the fawn of the hinds, says Rashi, until the sun spreads. This refers back to the preceding verse. My beloved is mine and I am his. Until the time that the iniquity caused the sun to darken me in the heat of the day, and the heat to intensify, and the shadows flee, says Rashi, we sinned with the calf, we sinned with the spies, and the shadows fled, the merits that protected us. We broke off his yoke. Go around, liken yourself, my beloved. I caused him to leave me on mountains distant from me. Because here they translate distant mountains, Hare Batar. So finally, Rashi says, why Batar? The expression of separation and distancing. In other words, even according to Rashi, even according to the historic perspective, once you get later to the end of the second song, it's clear that she is telling him to leave. And what that means is the Jewish people sin. And when they sin, they cause God to flee. And that's what happened And when the god flees, the shadow also passes away, meaning the shadow leaves. The shadow is the protective, the God's protection from the Jewish people. So that's the end of the second song, just to show how, even according to the historic perspective, the end of the second song, she's telling him to go take a hike, at least temporarily. Later, she says, come back later. Of course, she doesn't come back later. But now, again, like I said, we really want to focus on verse 14, which, according to the simple meaning, as well as according to the Kabbalistic meaning, we're talking about the exile. The exile is a time when the Jewish people are trapped in the clefts of the rock. They don't want to connect to God. God says, come to me. We're not available. So what we want to do now, after we did the two interpretations of the simple meaning and the historic perspective, we want to move a little to the Kabbalistic perspective. But in the meantime, if anybody has any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, so to get to Kabbalistic interpretation of verse 14, we have to go back to verse 10. Verse 10, in verse 9 is what the verse we read last week. My beloved resembles a gazelle or a fawn of the hinds. Behold, he is standing behind verse 8 also. The beloved is coming, skipping over the mountains, jumping over the hills. So God is coming to the Jewish people. And then what does God finally tell the Jewish people when he comes? What does God say? My beloved, verse 10, my beloved raised his voice and said to me, arise, my beloved, my fair one, and come away. Kumi lach, go up to yourself. My beloved, my fair one. Here they're saying, come away, but of course they're translating it in Hebrew, ulechi lach, go to yourself. What does that remind you of? Remind you of the third parsha of the Torah, where God tells Abraham, lech lecha, go to you. So when God comes to redeem the people, God comes to the woman and says, arise and go to yourself, go to you. My beloved, my fair one, my beautiful one, and go to you. What does it mean to go to you? So here's where the Hasidic and Kabbalistic interpretation comes in, and they say as follows. What does it mean to go to you? So the first point is that where are you? Where am I? So what the Kabbalah says is very interesting. The Kabbalah says that the entire body does not enter, the entire soul does not enter the body. The essence of the soul does not enter your body. Why? Because it's too powerful and it's too spiritual, and your body is too physical. So there's really no connection between the essence of your soul and your body. What happens is there's a ray of light of the essence of the soul that comes into your body to give your body light, and that's the conscious soul that you have. But it's not your essence. Where is your essence? Your essence hovers above you and around you. In the language of Kabbalah, it's makif. It encompasses you. It surrounds you. Why does it surround you? Because it's too powerful to be expressed within you. And sometimes you feel it. You feel the essence of your soul. Where do you feel it, for example? For example, you feel it when inspiration or an idea comes into your mind, into your conscious mind, sort of out of the blue. The verse says, "Hachachma me'ayin timatzeh." Chachma, wisdom, appears from nowhere. When all of a sudden, an idea falls into your head, you say, where does it come from? You don't know. It feels like it comes from nowhere. But where does it come from? It comes from the essence of your soul. The essence of your soul is not felt. Why isn't it felt within you? Because it hovers above you, because it's too great to enter your consciousness. Now, by the way, that is, of course, why in Judaism we say Mazal Tov. You say when something good happens, you say you should have good luck. Luck is the wrong word. There's no luck for the Jewish people. Ein Mazal Yisrael, the sages say. So what does Mazal Tov mean? What does good luck mean? Well, the equivalent of good luck, congratulations. So literally the word Mazal comes from the word nozel. Nozel means like a flow or a dripping. There's a verse in, there are many verses in the Bible that use that term. So Kabbalistically speaking, when you want to wish somebody good things, you're basically saying the flow should drip down upon you. From where? From the essence of your soul, because the essence of your soul has an infinite amount of innovation, an infinite amount of kindness, an infinite amount of connection to God. Your conscious mind doesn't always perceive that. So the blessing is mazal tov. The flow of blessing and goodness should come from the essence of your soul, which is hovering above you, and it should flow within yourself, within your conscious mind. That is the introductory points. Once we have the introductory points, now we could say as follows. We could say that when God comes to the Jewish people and says what? He says, arise to yourself, go to yourself. What does go to yourself mean? Where am I? I'm here. No, you're not here. In other words, you should raise your consciousness to the essence of your soul. You should yearn to have that connection to the essence of your soul, which the essence of the soul is always connected and always has the awareness of God. And what we're saying is, God comes to the person and says, raise yourself and connect yourself to the consciousness of the essence of the soul. That's kumilach. That's go up to yourself. And when you do that, you will have the yearning that the essence of the soul has to connect to God. And now, what that would trigger, says the Kabbalah, what that will trigger is my beloved, my fear one. But I don't want to get into too much of this. Basically, according to the Kabbalah, the Torah is God's wisdom. The mitzvot are God's will. But God's will and wisdom is not just static. It's not just standing there. We have to, according to the Kabbalah, part of what we do is we have to draw God's essence into the Torah, because the Torah is God's wisdom. But God is not always invested in his wisdom. So it's our job to to bring down God's essence into God's wisdom. And the same thing with the commandments. It's God's will, but sometimes God doesn't want it. We cause God's essence to want this mitzvah. This is a Kabbalistic idea, which is very different than the conventional way of looking at it. And that's why if you look at Jewish in the Talmud, you would say you're supposed to learn Torah lishma. Lishma means for its own sake. And the idea is don't learn it for ulterior motives. Don't learn it to get honor. Don't learn it to get wisdom. You only learn it out of love to God. That's lishma, for its own sake. But the Kabbalistic interpretation is you learn Torah for its own sake. Not I learn it out of love. That's not for its sake. It's not for the sake of the Torah. So the Kabbalistic interpretation is you study Torah for the sake of the Torah. What does it mean for the sake of the Torah? To bring the infinite light of God into the Torah. How do you bring the infinite light of God of the Torah? If you have a desire, if you're learning Torah out of love to God and you want to connect to God, that elicits within God. God then reciprocates, and because we want a relationship with him, he then wants a relationship with us, and he will descend into the Torah and into the mitzvot that we perform. So in other words, it's a relationship. It's a two-way street. We have to want him for him to want us. And according to the Kabbalah, we trigger everything. That's why God comes to us and says, arise. Raise yourself to the consciousness of the essence of your soul, and then you will make me. They write saying my beloved, but Rayati, the sages of the Medrash says, Rayati comes from the word, the one who pastures me, the one who gives me the sustenance. We give God sustenance. How do we give God sustenance? So the Kabbalah says, because we bring the Torah sustenance, we bring the essence of God into the Torah and into the mitzvot. And Yafati, my beautiful. Yafati, how do you become beautiful? You put on garments. The mitzvot are the garments. And we make the garments beautiful because we will arise and we raise ourselves to the level of the essence of the soul that wants a relationship with God, and therefore God reciprocates and wants a relationship with us and comes down into the Torah, into the mitzvot, and then we could study Torah and do mitzvot and connect to God. All this is the way it should be, the way it is in the time of spiritual redemption. Now we get to the actual drama. All this was by way of introduction. Now we get to verse 14. Verse 14 is so beautiful and so poetic and so powerful. What does verse 14 say? Verse 14 says, we don't want to come to God, right? What does the woman say? The man is saying, you're trapped. Could you at least, I want to hear you. I want to see you. The bottom line is he's calling to her. She's not available. She's not coming out. Later, she says, go have a nice day. But before that, my dove is in the clefts of the rock. In the coverture, she's covered by the steps. She's concealed. The man says, show me your appearance. Let me hear your voice. What happens here? Says the Kabbalah, we're talking about the soul in the time of exile. Time of exile doesn't just mean, geographical exile. We're outside of Israel, but the geographical exile is really a spiritual exile. When we're in exile, it's because we don't have the temple, so we don't have the awareness that we had of the presence of God that was available when God dwelt in the temple. So now what are we? Now we are trapped in the rock. The rock represents the physical. We're trapped in the body. The soul is trapped in the body. It's trapped in the body. What can the bird do when it's trapped in the clefts of the rock? The bird cannot spread its wings. Well, we know that if you study Tanya, you know the Kabbalah says, when Tanya quotes the Zohar, that what are the wings? The wings is love and awe of God. You have the body is the mitzvah, the Torah you study, the mitzvah you do, but then you need wings to elevate and inspire your life. And the wings are the love and awe. And what the man is, how the man is describing the woman, how the man of God is describing the Jewish people, says, my dove, my beloved, is trapped in the clefts of the rock, meaning she is not able, because she doesn't have the awareness of God, she's not able to spread the wings and soar upward. She's not able to inspire herself with love and awe of God, because for this love and awe, you need awareness of God. And in the exile, you cannot really, it's very difficult to achieve the awareness of God. So we're trapped, going back to the verse, we're trapped in the cleft. My dove is in the clefts of the rock. But however, it says in the curvature of the steps, we're covered by the steps. The rock forms like steps, and we're covered. So the Kabbalistic reading is not that we're covered. Yeah, we're covered. But the love, what love do we have in the exile? We have the concealed love. Because according to the Kabbalah, there is the revealed love that you get through awareness. When you understand the greatness of God and you feel the presence of God, that creates love and awe. But the soul has a hidden love that is always there. It's not felt, but it's always there, and it's there even in the exile. And that's what verse 14 says. My dove, the Jewish people, we may be in the clefts, we're in the clefts of the rock because we're in the exile, we're covered, we're trapped, we can't spread our wings, we can't awaken the love and awe. But we're in the curvature, we're covered, the love is covered. So what do we do now? What do we do? What's the solution? What's the reason? What's the purpose? How are we going to advance the relationship in the time where we cannot spread our wings and soar upward and inspire ourselves with love and awe to God? And that is what the end of the verse says. And we alluded to this on Sunday when we spoke about the mirror, because here is what I was alluding to. If you continue reading the verse, show me your appearance. Harini et mar'ayich. The word mar'ah, appearance, is the exact same word as mirror. What does mirror mean? A mirror is, as we discussed on Sunday, a mirror is an interesting phenomenon. The Kabbalah loves the metaphor of the mirror because you have the piece of glass which is transparent and allows the light to shine through. But then a mirror is where you conceal the piece of glass. And sometimes the concealment is so powerful that nothing happens. The light, it just stops the light. However, if you have a mirror, the concealment doesn't stop the light. Instead, what the concealment does, it creates a reflection. A reflection means the light bounces back to the source. And the metaphor is that we are, when we're in the time of spiritual redemption, we're like the glass. The light of God shines right through us. There's no concealment. In a time of exile, there is concealment. We're in the clefts of the rock. The animal soul, the body is so coarse that the light of God doesn't shine through. So there's a block. We don't sense the awareness of God. However, God says what happens now is you can use this as a mirror, because when the light of God is concealed, you don't have love and awe, but what you could have is yearning and longing. And the yearning and the longing in exile is much more powerful than the love that you had in the times of the temple, because it's a product of our own calling out to God. And that is really what's happening here when the verse continues, and the verse says, the end of the verse, show me your appearance, show me your mirror. And he continues, for your voice is pleasant and your appearance is beautiful, your appearance is comely. What's happening here is God is saying that calling to God because we feel distant, that yearning is actually more beautiful than the love that we had in the times of the temple. So this is the big idea. And unfortunately, I have to run because I have to go to the funeral of a great rabbi, Rabbi Yael Khan, who was the chief editor of the Rebbe's talks, and we can talk about him at another time. But I have to go to his funeral. Unfortunately, he passed away. He's 91, and we were close to him when we were growing up. He'd come to my house very often, but that's another story. But I wanted to just take 2 minutes to talk about the time we're sitting in, a few days before the Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple. When you read this song on a simple level, we're reading verse by verse. We don't always get the chance to get the bird's eye view. So I want to take 3 minutes to look at the bird's eye view. The first two songs, as we discussed, you see a story of missed opportunity. It's a sad story. What's the sad story? Whenever God is ready, we're not available. When we're available, he's not available. It's a sad story. But once you start looking from the Hasidic perspective, you realize, and I'm really giving away the point of the whole book here, in some sense, from the Kabbalistic perspective, you realize that the exile is not an abandonment. The exile is not just a missed opportunity. There is beauty to the exile. The exile intensifies the relationship and the love to God more than we could have had in the times of the temple. And as we see later, as we proceed throughout the song, even the simple meaning, you'll realize that times of the temple were not all have its own challenges. Just because the man and the woman later in the later chapters will get married, they don't live happily ever after. Marriage does not solve all the problems. And ironically, within the darkness, and this is the big Kabbalistic idea, we're going to see it many times throughout the book, but the big idea here is that throughout the darkness, in some sense, throughout the darkness, the relationship is deepened. Throughout the challenge, throughout the separation, the relationship is deepened. And here is one example. God says, okay, so you can spread the love and awe. You don't feel closeness to God. But what you could do, you feel the concealment. Okay, but that concealment could reflect the light back. You can raise yourself. You can have a yearning to God that was more powerful, and a longing that was more powerful than what you had when you felt the closeness to God. And that to God is more beautiful. Why is it more beautiful? Because it's more powerful. Like the Hasidic philosophy quotes the Zohar. The Zohar says the Baal Teshuvah, someone who is distant from God and then comes back closer to God, draws down holiness, b'chei lo yatir, which is Aramaic for with more strength and more passion, because more than the person who never sinned, who always felt close to God. So feeling close to God is only half the coin. Perhaps what the book is telling us is that when we're in exile, either collectively or personally, when we have our own challenges in our life, we could look at it as a time that we don't have a relationship with God, we have abandoned God, or God has abandoned us. Or we could listen to the voice of God, and God is saying, yes, you're in the clefts of the rock. Yes, you can soar upward. Yes, you can spread your wings of love and awe. But what you could do is you could have the mirror, you can create the longing and the yearning, and to God, that is even more beautiful. As the verse says, for your voice is pleasant and your appearance is beautiful. And the yearning, and that's the full relationship. The full relationship we get when we have both the closeness to God, but also the longing and the yearning that we get throughout the exile, which intensifies the love in a way that could not have happened when we felt close to God. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is appropriate for before Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple. You say, why are we reading about the love to God and to the Jewish people just a few days before the destruction? Because again, from the Kabbalistic perspective, the destruction is just the background against which we can create a deeper yearning and a deeper longing to God, which then intensifies our connection. And then once again, when we return to God and we be reunited in the coming of Mashiach, and we feel the intimacy and the closeness, we also have the intensity of the yearning and the intensity of the longing, and then the relationship is complete. And only then can we live happily ever after. So this is the story in short. I'm sorry I gave a few spoilers for the book today, but I couldn't resist. So That's it for today. Any questions, comments, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos. And we should see each other in good health and ultimately with the coming of Mashiach speedily.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Thank you. Good Shabbos, Rabbi.
Thank you.